When explorers spotted a strange glimmer deep in the jungle, they had no idea they were about to uncover a missing World War II plane, untouched for 80 years. But when they stepped inside, they found something no one could explain. But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. He was an archaeologist, so naturally he was always looking for the next discovery to be found. He was always anticipating something soon. He waited, and finally it had come to him. Fred's colleague was David Talashe. Both men kept wanting to achieve great things. They wanted to go where no one had gone in decades. They thought they were ready, but nothing could have prepared them. The two were circling over Papua New Guinea's infamous jungle. They could just see the tops of green descending into the dark swamp where their roots would be. Then amongst the swamp, Fred sees what they've been looking for. The people that lived near the swamp called it an omen. To them, it was the swamp ghost. The men changed expressions once they spotted the metallic sheen amongst the jungle trees. The artifact had been hidden for decades, and they had found it at long last. It looked very strange, but it may have been due to how far away they were. They should have listened to their sensible sides at left with the extraordinary sight in their minds. But they couldn't leave it there. They pleaded with the pilot of the helicopter to descend even more. He was hesitant. He didn't want his craft to become the next swamp ghost, but he reluctantly agreed. As they swooped in closer, the men couldn't help but each have a wide grin. They could now tell that the craft had submerged in the swampy, murky water. The parts left above the waterline were covered in vines and obscured by grass. They now knew they'd finally found it. The old aircraft from World War II looked more beautiful than the men had ever imagined. Just seeing her from the air was a sight to behold. They quickly organized with some locals to get the right equipment for the job. They needed a team as well. They also decided to ignore all of the warnings they had received. The warnings they had received weren't lighthearted. Other people caught wind of the expedition, and they knew they had to go forward to get to it first. They had heard stories from the locals about men before them who had tried to discover the secrets of the swamp ghost, never to come back at all. The locals believed that by worshiping the aircraft and marking the area as hallowed land, that they would be safe. All of the locals respect the swamp. They know it has more crashed aircraft and bomb craters than they can count. With all of the death that World War II brought, they knew the swamp was cursed. But of all the artifacts of a war that happened decades ago, they revered the swamp ghost. It was the thing they respected the most in the swamp. They still say they see strange silhouettes march from the swamp, like ghost pilots searching for their crashed planes. Fred and David weren't going to back down, not for any legend anyway. They saw an opportunity where the locals saw superstition. Even if the land was cursed, they thought of it as an adventure. After they organized the rest of the equipment that they needed, they got men who were willing to set out into the marshland. But nothing could have prepared the men for what they were going to find in the swamp. Fred and David were veterans when it came to their craft. They had been through a lot together and were excited as ever to trek through the swamp in search of their treasure. Soon they found that their energy would fade with the rough terrain, but their passion kept them going for far longer than most men, soon encroaching on territory that hadn't been walked through for decades, if ever. But soon they would find that there was more than superstition that presented dangers. As Fred stopped to take a drink of water, he saw something move in the water from the corner of his eye. He froze and slowly looked towards the movement. His mind raced with the stories he heard of crocodiles and giant anacondas that patrolled these parts of the jungle. He turned his head and saw nothing, but it was enough to have him shouting at his team to move forward to the dry land ahead. Suddenly, their hearts raced. The mysterious plane was in sight. From the distance, it reflected the light of the sun so bright that it felt like it was calling their name, enticing them to come over. Their clothes were wet and dirty from the waist down after trekking through the swamp, but the humidity and sun prevented them from being cold. Fred, David, and their team had already conquered one of the most foreboding challenges of their mission. Now all they had to do was keep walking towards the bright light. They walked through the unforgiving landscape of the dense jungle for hours until they finally reached the site. Silence engulfed the team as everybody stood in awe at what they saw. No one knew the story behind this plane. That's why Fred and David were hell-bent on finding out more about its mysterious origins. Now, as they stood within arm's length of it, they couldn't soak in the details fast enough. From its structure, they could tell it was a plane from World War II. This wasn't a surprise, as Papua New Guinea was a war hotbed and major conflict zone during the war. Every year, war enthusiasts had flocked to Papua New Guinea to see for themselves the wreckage that lay strewn over parts of the islands. Because of its strategic location, it became the site of many clashes between the Australians, Japanese, and Americans, all of which had set up military bases in different areas. Fred and David expected to feel a deep sense of history here, but they never saw this coming. What the swamp had been hiding for so many years was actually a huge World War II airplane in incredible condition, remaining largely intact. Locals had been calling it the swamp ghost because it was so well hidden deep in the jungle, as well as believing it to be haunted. Why was such a massive plane in the middle of the jungle? Who flew it? What happened? They were about to find out. The plane's location was probably the major reason why it was largely unexplored. The deep swamplands also made it almost impossible to remove the aircraft from the site for further study. But that wouldn't stop Fred and David from trying to find a way to salvage and study the plane, move it out of there, and restore it to its old glory. First, they stepped inside. Their bodies shook with excitement as they entered the aircraft. Their hopes were high that a lot of its interior would be preserved just like its exterior. Unfortunately, when they stepped inside, it was ransacked. All of the mechanics and weaponry inside of the aircraft had already been looted over the decades it lay here. Luckily, David was already able to identify pieces of its story. As a World War II veteran, David had lots of experience in dealing with all types of aircraft. He even has a business of collecting and restoring military aircraft. It was his main reason for coming on this mission. His collection included amazing aircraft such as a B-25 Mitchell bomber and a P-40 Tomahawk. But this find would top them all. David quickly discovered that the type of plane stuck in the swamp was the exact same type of plane that he had piloted during World War II. Once they knew what they were dealing with, they began attempting to salvage the plane in the 1980s. But in true swamp ghost fashion, they suffered setbacks, making it decades before they completed the extremely difficult task. According to Fred, the restoration of the plane was their greatest dream, because for some reason it captured the imagination of people from around the world. The plane was first nicknamed the Flying Fortress. This happened when a journalist saw the plane during a test flight back in 1935 and remarked that it looked like a flying fortress. But what about its backstory? How did the plane get stuck in the cursed swamp? Just one day before the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Swamp Ghost was sent out on a special mission. Instead of flying with the Kangaroo Squadron that day, it was sent out on one of the earliest bombing missions of the Second World War. But then disaster struck. The Japanese invaded the island of New Britain in Papua New Guinea. Swamp Ghost would be the first to the scene, and with that suffered disastrous consequences. The Swamp Ghost may have been hidden away for decades, swallowed by the jungle, and forgotten by time. But thanks to Fred and David's determination, its story has finally resurfaced. What started as a mysterious shimmer in the swamp turned into one of the most haunting and historic discoveries of World War II aviation. A relic of war, a symbol of survival, and a reminder of the many stories that still lie buried beneath the earth, waiting to be found. So the next time you hear of something lost in the jungle, don't assume it's just another ghost story. Sometimes, the truth is even more unbelievable than the legend. If this story gave you chills like this video, subscribe for more real mysteries, and let us know in the comments. What do you think really happened to the Swamp Ghost?